Welcome to Adulting. I'm Fred, and here's some of my thoughts on being a grown-up and being a parent, specifically. Today I want to talk first about the power of escalation. Escalation is one of those things that I think it can solve most, maybe not most, but a good chunk of the problems we have with our kids or with others. But first, what does that mean? Okay, to escalate means become or cause to become more intense or serious. Let me read that again. Become or cause to become more intense or serious. So, as a parent, one of the main tools you have in helping your kids grow up is deciding how quickly a situation escalates. You're not always in control. Sometimes kids throw fits, sometimes things happen and it just doesn't work out. But most of the time, you as the adult get to decide when it turns bad. So, first a few examples of like bad escalation. When you have to ask over and over and over and then all of a sudden you explode. So it's like, hey, put your shoes away, okay? Can you please put your shoes away? I asked you to put your shoes away. Put your shoes away! And the beast comes out and you're like, I told you, and Hulk or whatever. But so that's obviously less than ideal. Another way that we escalate in a poor way is we give an ultimatum too early. I've seen myself do this. It's pretty funny when it happens to me because I just look at myself and I'm like, oh, that was stupid. But it's like your kids will be in the middle of playing and you'll be like, okay, we need to be done, and they need to have their shoes put away, and you want it done now, but they're not ready to listen yet. And so you're like, I'm going to count to 5, and if they're not done, whatever, then it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they are just getting out of the playing mode by the time, and you're like, you get to 5 and they're still like not even ready to listen yet. And then it's like, okay, now I have to execute on this threat that I made that doesn't really get me where we needed to go. So when you give an ultimatum too early is the second example I've seen myself do. And then another one is happens often is when you kind of build up a pattern of asking and asking and asking until they explode. Sometimes you just explode from the get-go, and you should put your shoes away. You should do that. And you don't even give the chance because you know that you're just gonna ask and ask and ask and then explode. And one of the reasons why we do this as people is because we get into a habit and we train our kids to listen in a certain way. So we train them to not have to listen until we explode. So it's like, I asked you, and then I asked you, and then they hear that and that bell turns on in their head and they're like, oh, okay, now's the time that I have to actually do it. Because the first few times they didn't really mean it. And when you ask and ask and ask and it doesn't get done, you don't really mean it. To be honest with yourself, you don't mean it. That's just the how you're training them, and it creates a huge frustration for you as a parent, without needing to have that frustration. So, a way to have a good escalation, and this is just what I've seen lately. Things do change, but one is you ask, and then you threaten to threaten, and then once you've threatened to threaten, then you actually make the threat, and that's when I typically will give an ultimatum, and usually, and then once you hit the ultimatum, then you have to execute on the threat. If you ever threaten something that you're not willing to follow through on, you lose immediate credibility with your kids, and they know that you're not serious because you're not. That's what you do. Is if you say, I'm going to do this if you don't do that, and then you don't do it, you're not being serious. So what I find myself doing is I'll ask my kids, hey, can you put your shoes away? And they'll be playing or whatever, and they won't listen, and then I'll have to make sure. I'll say, okay, do I need to count? I mean, counting is just a threat. It's not a big deal. Do I actually need to count? And it's kind of, I think, one of the ways that you train your kids, or you teach your kids to kind of do things and get along with you well, is by knowing when to expect what. And so it's like, do I need a count? And my kids are like, no, you don't need a count. I'll go do it. I'll go do it. Fine, I'll go do it. And it's kind of like okay, I got it. I'll take care of it. And at most of the times they do that. But that's just because they know. There have been times where the threaten to threaten has. I've had to go through with it, and obviously you have to count, or you have to, whatever the threat is, and then before you, with, like, for instance, with counting, that's one I'm not a huge fan of, but it does work. Is you have to let them know, okay, if I get to 3, if I get to 5, this is what I'm going to do. And there has to be a more severe threat that they don't want to have happen that you're willing to do. And whether that's like taking away a toy, or whether that's taking something that they're playing with and throwing it in the garbage, whether that's giving them a spanking or putting them in timeout or whatever it is. That's you need to only threaten things that you're willing to do. And so that means you need to be very careful with what you threaten. You never want to threaten something like, I'll kick you out, or I'll make you do this, or I'll... one time I threatened, well, I think I've done it maybe twice now, twice or 3 times, I don't know. But it's happened rarely, but I've threatened to make my daughter sleep in the tub just because she was not laying in her bed, and she was keeping her other sisters awake because they have bunk beds, and they're all in the same room. 3 of them are in the same room, and and it was just like, well, I got to take her out of that room so the other 2 can sleep because they all have school tomorrow. And so I was like, I'm going to make you sleep in the tub. And I asked myself, like, would I really do that? And I don't think I would. It just seems mean. Like, I don't know. I don't like that. But I did make her go and lay in the tub. And after about 5 minutes, I gave her chances to, okay, are you ready to be good? Are you ready to be good? And she laid in the tub. And the second time I did it, she's like, well, I'm just going to take a bath. And I was like, oh, no, that totally backfired. And which it does sometimes. And that's fine. But what I was getting at, though, is this power of deciding how quickly things go wrong is a huge advantage that you have as a parent. And that's something that you have that helps you to help the home run smoothly, so there's not yelling, so you're not constantly fighting or constantly nagging or constantly have that sometimes when things go wrong or things are not regular, like in the home, it's like there's a cloud of frustration. One of the best definitions for frustration I've found is all frustration comes from unmet expectation. And that's basically meaning that when you are frustrated, when your kid's frustrated, that means they expected, or you expected, something to happen and it didn't. And so that causes frustration. With this and with anything in parenting, I think that the key is consistency. You need to be consistent, and your kids need to have something that they can rely on, that they know this is what's going to happen, this is the behavior that's expected of me, and so in consistency, it's also very important that you listen to your kids and that you get them to listen to you. You can't control escalation. You can't decide those things if, one, you're not listening to your kid, and your kid's not listening to you. That's more important than you listening to them, honestly. If your kid is not listening to you, and it makes it much easier for your kid to listen to you when they are reciprocating the listening you have for them. So that includes, like, making sure that they're ready to listen. A common thing that I find myself doing is I'll ask my kids, I'll be like, what did I say? What did I say? And I'll ask them over and over and over again until they can tell me again what it was that I asked them, so I know that they understand what is expected of them. And when they get it wrong, which we all do sometimes, they all do sometimes, they'll be like, oh, you said this, and it's not exactly what I said. I said this, and I'll repeat myself, and it's not like a malicious, it's not mad, but it's just making sure that there's that clear, you expect them to listen to you, and you listen to them and what they're saying. And that does take effort, and that's why that consistency is so important. You have to be able to be consistent in how you're putting that effort. But when you put that effort in the front end of like getting it set up right so that you know what to expect from them and they know what to expect from you, it's much easier than trying to just put out fires of like, oh, this kid's screaming and this and the house is a mess and this, and which those things do happen. Don't get discouraged when they do, because they do to everybody. But that's one of the things, is you have to listen and observe and pay attention. And when you do that, you build credibility. I said that we train our kids to ignore us, and it's kind of a silly to think about, oh, we're training our kids, and you don't want to be training your kids. You want to help your kids develop. That's the main goal. But when we consistently act in a certain way, that does train them to behave in a certain way. And so there is a part of, you need to be consistent in how you interact with them. One last note that I didn't mention is every kid's different. Like, there's that whole, the thing that as I was trying to think of how to describe it, ask, threaten to threaten, execute the threat. That's just a very, very, very rough idea. There's not a real set way that you need to act with each kid. You need to get to know each kid individually. They are different, and not only are they different from one kid to another, but they're also different from one time to another. In the morning versus in the afternoon, on Monday versus Wednesday, it doesn't matter. So things to pay attention to and things to watch with your kids is, are they tired? Are they hungry? Is something frustrating them? Those are three big ones. It's like, okay, the kid's tired. He's not going to do good at listening, so we need to be a little bit more rudimentary. We need to be a little bit more blunt. Oh, the kid's hungry. Let's try and solve that need. Help to get that need filled first. Get him something to eat, and then he's going to be able to do better at listening and do better at following and getting along with you. But that's not just applicable to your kids. We get tired and hungry and frustrated, obviously, as well. That's a given. But when you're tired, especially, or hungry or frustrated, when you're in a state that you're not at your best, you're not on your A game, realize that. And you don't have to lose credibility because of that. With your kids, again, and I said this again, don't threaten something that you're not willing to follow up on. And don't threaten things that are terrible, because you don't want to follow up on terrible things. You want to be a good parent, But I've even had times where I've been really, really tired, or we got back from driving for a long time down big trips or whatever. And I remember looking at one of my daughters, and she was pretty happy and cheerful and stuff, and she was in a good state. I was not. I was super tired, and I was like, you better go to your room, or else I am going to walk through that door and I'm just going to lay in my bed. And that's what I told her. I was like, I threatened something that I was willing to do, but it wasn't a threat at all. It was a very weak threat. And I told her, I was like, and she looked at me, she's like, what? And I was like, honestly, I'm super tired. That's what I'm going to do. So go do that. And she listened, and she understood, because we had built up a credibility at that point. And there are times they're not going to listen. It's not going to always work out, and that's okay. That's part of growing up and adulting. Have fun.